I want to take just a few minutes to review the questions that were submitted via Blackboard for the Chapter 30 Perfect Participles. I did remove one of them that we went over in class today, but wanted to go over the rest of these. So let's start with a parsing that we have. So we have here our perfect middle passive participle, the dative feminine singular from Playrao. If you translated this as a as an adverbial participle, it would be after having been filled or fulfilled, or if it was a substantival participle, you would say to the woman who has been filled or fulfilled. Okay, I think the likelihood is that this would be most likely used as an adverbial participle. Now, the next one that was we had a question about would be number 7, Pepis Stukin. Now, the reason why this one might be a bit of a difficulty is that it's not a participle. So we do have reduplication with the pet there. We have pistu, which is our stem. Okay, we have the kappa here. Now, the thing that is going to tell the tale, as it were, is this section right here, our ending. So we've got a perfect. The kappa tells us it's going to be active. We have from there have to figure out, is this indicative? Is it a participle? Now, where the difficulty arises comes from the fact that you have in the perfect, you have in the nominative masculine singular, you have kos, okay, and in the accusative masculine singular, you have kota. Then in the neuter, you have the kappa, and then the omicron, and then when the tau and the nu combine, you're just left with con, as I recall. Now, to be perfectly honest, you don't see this one very regularly, so I don't have a tremendous amount of confidence in this one, so I'm going to make sure that I am not leading you astray here. Actually, it's cos. Excuse me, I should have known that. So this is one of those oddities. It doesn't follow the normal pattern that you would see in the neuter. This is one of those things where, at the end of the day, as long as you can recognize it, I'm not terribly concerned with you memorizing necessarily what you have. And then you will have a cos as well in the neuter accusative singular, because the neuter, nominative, and accusative share the same form. So just remember this one, because clearly it tripped me up. So from there, we recognize that we don't have anything that looks like this. The feminine is kuia, which is a little different. It follows a first declension pattern. And if it were the accusative, you would have an alpha nu kuion, which is different than this as well. So what we actually have here, even though this epsilon nu could be a little confusing, because a nu is certainly an accusative case ending in the second declension, and the epsilon is something that we see as a connecting vowel in various places, which could lead into some confusion over here. All we have here is a perfect active indicative third person singular. He, she, it has believed. That's all we have here. So the epsilon nu is a third singular ending in the perfect active. So this is a perfect active indicative, third person singular from pisteuo, and it means he, she, it has believed. All right, so let's move on to the translations here. So let's go to number 6. Translation number 6, I'm going to read it all aloud. And in this one, we have our genitive absolute. Okay, so kai uthus, eti autou laluntas, paragenetai, eudos, heis ton dodeca, kai metautou aklos. All right, so let's sort of divide this up into pieces. And paragenetai is our indicative verb here, and he, she, it comes. This is a present act or present deponent, middle indicative, third singular, but you are given that it's from paragenomai, which you haven't had yet. Then we have eudos, which is the subject of this. Judas comes, and notice here that Judas is described as one of the 12. Notice there the heis, one of the 12. Judas, in apposition to that, is one of the 12. And then you have kai and a crowd with him. Now this metautou is a prepositional phrase for sure, but it's so removed from the main verb, and it sits in this construction in a bit of an interesting way. Even though there isn't an article, you can't really have an article with aklos because you don't have one with eudos, and you would expect these to be in parallel because of the kai. So the metautou, in a bit of an oddity, goes with aklos. So we have Judas, one of the 12, and a crowd with him, or the with him crowd for that matter, the crowd which was with him, if you wanted to translate it that way, comes. Okay. Now, that then leaves us with this kai uthus eti autou laluntas. Now, one of the things with genitive absolutes is oftentimes you're going to have adverbs of time with these genitive absolutes because they are generally going to be temporal adverbial participles. So, and that's exactly what we have here. So we have immediately and while that are both indicative of time. These are adverbs of time, and they are with this autou laluntas. The other thing that you have to have with a genitive absolute is that the participle and the pronoun really have no connection to the rest of the sentence. And I think that's certainly the case here. There's nothing for autou to connect to. It wouldn't make sense for it to be connected to eudos or aklos or anything that's come before. Well, really, actually, it does connect with something that's come before, and it's talking about while Jesus was still speaking. So this autou goes to a previous sentence, nothing in this particular sentence, and it's a genitive masculine singular, and the same is the case for laluntas because you've got this omicron sigma, which is the genitive singular masculine or neuter form of laleo. The epsilon has combined with an omicron here with your connecting vowel to give you the un. You've got your new ta participle morpheme, and then you've got your os, remember sos, sigma, omicron sigma. So this is a genitive masculine singular, present or imperfective, active participle. And so the quote-unquote subject of the participle, of this adverbial participle, is autou. They are linked together. They agree in case, gender, and number. And so what you've got here, and while he, talking about Jesus, is still speaking, or was still speaking, and immediately while he is still speaking, that's the eti, was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, comes, and with him a crowd. So the thing that we talked about in the lecture material is that the use of the genitive absolutes allows you to sort of in the same sentence, not even sort of, allows you in the same sentence to describe two separate actions done by two separate entities. So normally when you have an adverbial participle, like when it's connected to the subject of the sentence, the subject is doing the action in the participle, the subject is doing the action in the main verb. Here, the action of the adverbial genitive absolute is not grammatically connected to the rest of the sentence, but is temporally connected. And so you've got, while Jesus is doing this, Judas, one of the 12, and the crowd with him are coming up to him. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So when you're dealing with genitive absolutes, you're going to have a genitive pronoun, you're going to have a genitive participle, usually at the beginning, and it's an adverbial participle, usually at the beginning of the sentence, and oftentimes you're going to have these adverbial or these temporal adverbs that are going to sort of emphasize the temporal nature of the genitive absolute. And when I say temporal, that it's dealing with a time connection to the main clause. All right, that brings us to number 7. Now, in number 7, we have here hupo, not yet, gar, and remember that's translated first because gars are post-positive, ein bebleminos, eis tein phulakein, ha Ioannes. So ha Ioannes, we know that is our nominative masculine singular because we have the article. Even if you don't know exactly how Ioannes declines, and it doesn't always work terribly smoothly, the article gets us out of jail free and tells us this is the subject, and eis tein phulakein is into, or in prison, into the prison, if you want to be specific there. And it seems as though the author is, although we don't exactly use the necessarily in English, particularly in a prepositional phrase. So gar, for, not yet, John. Okay, so now we have ein. Ein is the imperfect form of eimi. This is one that you've had as a vocabulary word. It's imperfect indicative third person singular, which makes sense because Ioannes is the subject of the verb. So we've got for John was not yet. Okay, or that's at least where we'll start. And then we have bebleminos. Okay, so let's look at this. We have a beta, epsilon, beta, and that's probably going to be indicative of the fact that we've got reduplication, although we could have a verb, beble something, but I don't think that's the case. We have the men here that tells us that this is a participle, and since we have a participle morpheme followed by this ble, which the eta is not a connecting vowel, it's not an omicron or an epsilon, then those two things together, no connecting vowel, reduplication, and a men, well, actually three things, tell us that this is a perfect or a combinative middle passive participle. Okay? And then since this follows a 2-1-2 pattern, you've got the omicron, which is your stem vowel. You've got the sigma ending. This is nominative masculine. That's not a very good N. I apologize for that. Not, or M for that matter. Nominative masculine singular participle. It is perfect middle passive or combinative middle passive participle. Now, at this point, we have a situation where we've got a to be verb followed by a participle, which is very much like we sometimes, in fact, regularly build various verb tenses in English. So this is a periphrastic. And so when with the periphrastic, where you've got an imperfect indicative form of eimi, and you've got a perfect participle, you can go in your book over to the very end of the chapter. I'm going to look up exactly what page, and you're going to have a list of how these various periphrastic, and that's essentially phrasing around, very literally, like you're walking around in circles kind of as you phrase it. And if you'll notice there on page 344, and you have an imperfect form of a me followed by a perfect participle, you have a pluperfect. So that means that your form of had or has is going to be in the past tense, and then you're going to have the participle, the perfect participle. And so what we have here is, for John had not yet been thrown into the prison or into prison, because you've got the imperfect form of a me, the perfect participle, and that is the next to last one in 30.16, and that would tell us had not, well, the not yet is from hupo, had been thrown, for John had not yet been thrown into prison. All right, that takes us then to number 11. All right, in number 11, we have several things taking place here. So let's read through it, and then we'll go forward. Hoi de presbyteroi ton Judeon heorakates ton Yesun meta ton matheton edexanta hina ekon has tain epangelion epoiesin auton paradunai. Okay, so paradunai is from a verb form that you will not have until the end of the semester, and it means to betray or to hand over. We have here the de, which is post-positive. Okay, so now we've got that, and we have hoi presbyteroi ton Judeon. So hoi presbyteroi is nominative masculine plural. From presbyteros, it means the elders. And then we have ton Judeon. The tone tells us this is genitive plural masculine. And so we've got the elders. The elders of the Jews. All right. Now, now we have the elders of the Jews. Heorakates is a participle. We see this morpheme here with the kappa. So it's a perfect participle or combinative. It's going to be a hard habit to break. A combinative, the Omicron tau tells us it's an active participle. And this is from horao, and the heorak is a form that you will need to memorize. It's on that list of principal parts of irregular verbs that you need to memorize. And so this is a perfect active participle from horao. It is nominative, and we know this because of the ending here, epsilon sigma. It is nominative masculine plural. Okay, these are the endings again. Follow a 3-1-3 pattern. If you're struggling with the third declension endings, that's back in chapter 10. All right, so the elders of the Jews, and since we don't have an article in front of heorakates, the likelihood is this is going to be an adverbial participle. So the elders of the Jews, after having seen Jesus, and then we have, so Jesus is the object of the verb, and then we have meta ton matheton, which is either going to go with heorakates or edexanta, from decamai, I take or receive. And it seems to me that the likelihood is that the metatone matheton is probably going with heorakates. So the elders of the Jews, after having seen Jesus with his disciples, took let's parse this. This is from Decamai. We've got the C here tells us that you've had the combination of a key and a plus a sigma. And you'll notice the alpha here tells us that this is a sigma alpha. And so it's a aorist. We've got the augment here, an aorist middle indicative, third person. So third person plural, because we've got both hoi presbyteroi and the anta ending tells us it's third plural. Otherwise, we would have had eta, sata. So we've got aorist, middle indicative, third person plural. The elders of the Jews, after having seen Jesus with the disciples, took one. Hina is one, and this is accusative masculine singular. It could also, it would not be neuter, because that would be a little bit different. And so took one of those, ekeinon is genitive masculine plural, one of those who, and then we have epoiesin, so one of those who, so this has goes back to hina, who epoiesin, aorist, you got the augment, poie, sigma epsilon, because it's third singular. And we know it's third singular because has is in the nominative case. It's the subject of the verb. Who did the promise, or who gave the promise. They took one of those who gave the promise, or who did the promise. Epangelion is accusative. This is one of those that he made up, so it's a little awkward as per usual. They took one of those, or received, either way is fine, one of those who did the promise or made the promise to betray him. And the auton goes with para dunai. That's a bit of an awkward one, frankly, and I'm sure you're not surprised since Mounts made that up, because sometimes they can be a little awkward. But he's trying, and you'll see the way this is set out here, in sort of in a phrasing of it. He's trying to make them awkward so that you really have to think through the translation and not, again, as often can be the case, rely on the English Bible. Now that brings us to number 12. Hoi pepistukates eis ton Yesun, Christianoi, kaluntai, hati, auton, hos, ton Christon, te, kai, ton, kurion, genoskusen. All right, so the hoi pepistukois, so we have a plural participle. This ates tells us, or the omicron tau in particular tells us it's a participle. It's a perfect combinative participle. You've got reduplication with an epsilon there. You've got the kappa, which tells us it's perfect active. The omicron tau that tells us it's a participle. And the epsilon sigma that tells us it's nominative masculine plural. We also know it's nominative masculine plural because of the article. Okay, that checks our work in a sense. So the ones who have believed, eis ton Yesun, is in or into Jesus. Okay, so that's our participial phrase. Then we have kaluntai. This is from kaleo. So you've had the epsilon plus an omicron, and there is sort of a contract verb functionality in the present tense, or the imperfective present. And so here we have untai, And this untai tells us that it's third plural. It's a present, middle passive, indicative, third plural. So the ones who have believed in Jesus are being called Christianoi. Okay, so Christianoi is the predicate nominative, and kaleo, particularly in the middle passive, can function sort of like an me to establish Christianoi as a predicate nominative here. So that then brings us to the last part, and then we have the hati that we need to determine whether it's that, since, or because. And I think in this situation, we're going to see that it's going to be because. So auton is referring back to Yesu. Okay. All right. And then we have this as here. That's going to modify the auton. And the way we get this is sort of through trial and error. And thankfully, I've had a fair amount of trial and error along the way, and I think can kind of sniff out what's going on here. And then genoskousin is a present, and notice this is from genosko, and then you have the us in there, is a present, active, indicative, third person plural from genosko. They are knowing, or they know. So the last part is because they know him, that's Jesus, as, and you've got this te kai, which is a little different than it normally is, but you have them together here. Normally you would probably have the te before the ton Christon, particularly if it was a te, both and. But here they're together. And so because they're together, you're going to see both and, te and kai, because they are knowing him as both Christ and Lord. Because they are knowing him as both Christ and Lord. All right. So that brings us to number 13. Now, number 13 is fairly straightforward, but a little awkward given that it's from 1 Clement. So I think the first part is pretty straightforward. Hey, charis tu kuriou haimon, the grace, charis tu kuriou haimon, the grace of our Lord, and then Jesus Christ is modifying our Lord, the grace of our Lord, Jesus Christ, essentially, Jesu Christu is in apposition to kuriou, the grace of our Lord, Jesus Christ. And then we have meth humon, with you. And then we have kai meta panton pantake. And so the footnote there with pantake means everywhere. And with all people everywhere. Sorry about that. With all people everywhere, of the ones. So we have tone, kekle, minon. This is the one difficult part of the verse. Kekle, minon. So this is a participle. We know this is a participle because of the min. The omega nu tells us it's genitive plural and likely masculine because it's talking about a group of people. And then the kappa epsilon tells us it's a perfect participle, and the kappa lambda eta is from kaleo, and the perfect kaleo, because of the letter that fell out of the stem, is still influenced by that, and the epsilon, or the alpha, and the lambda in the stem are going to flip spots here in the perfect, and you'll have a similar thing happen with balo as well. So here we have the grace of our Lord Jesus, of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the Hamon would go with Lord since it follows that. Kuru is its head noun. The grace of our Lord, Jesus Christ. And then we're really going to have to supply a to-be verb. This is a bit of a blessing. And oftentimes the to-be verbs are not stated in situations where they're obviously being used to save space on the scroll, to be honest. So the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with y'all and with all people everywhere. And then the tone keklemenon is a adjectival participle modifying ponton, and in some ways also modifying humon, but most closely ponton. All people everywhere who have been called by God and through Him, which is likely referring back here to Jesus. Okay? All right. We got two more. Number 15. Now, number 15 is another one. This is for a modified version of the Shepherd Vision 5.1. And so what we have here is pros uxamenu mu into oiko ace elthen on air kai espasata me kago espasamen auton. So the first part of this is to recognize with the pros uxamenu mu we have another genitive absolute. So this is from prosukamai. We've got the min, which tells us it's a participle. We've got the omicron upsilon that tells us it's a genitive. And depending upon the gender of the mu, we'll just say that it's masculine. We don't know. It certainly wouldn't be neuter. And then we have pros, ukamai, and you've got the sigma alpha there that tells us it's a perfective, aorist participle, middle participle. And the subject of the participle is the mu. So it's it's from prosukamai. It's after I worshipped in the house, or after I worshipped. And then we have aner ace elthen into oiko. So this is one of those situations where it's not altogether clear that whether this into oiko goes with ace elthen or if it goes with prosukamenu. Now, there are a couple of things that would point toward it going with prosukamenu. Normally, with ace elthen, prepositional phrases follow it. That's far more common. And usually, if you have a prepositional phrase about entering, you're going to have an ace preposition that follows ace elthen. It's going to be repetitive. It's going to be something that sticks in the mind. And so for those reasons, with the fact that we have an in and not an ace, the fact that it precedes and doesn't follow, makes it more likely in my mind that this goes here. But it's not going to be a huge theological difference. And again, this is not a biblical text anyway. So in terms of being terribly worried about the theological elements of the translation. So after I worshipped in the house, and I think this makes more sense, a man entered, and so that's ace elthen, aorist active indicative third person singular. And then we have espasata, and then we have espasamen. They're from the same verb. They're from the verb aspadzamai, which I believe you've now had. I greet, welcome. And so the sigma alpha tells us it's aorist. The lengthened eta, aspadzamai, starts with an alpha. The alpha has lengthened to an eta. So, and it's a deponent middle, aspadzamai. So we've got an aorist or perfective indicative, middle voice, third singular from aspadzamai. So it would mean that a man greeted, welcomed. A man also entered and greeted me. Okay, so the aner is the subject of both eis elthen and eis basata. And we're going to mark this out because it doesn't go with it. So, and then we have kago, and I, and then we have eis basamein, and we've got, again, the same thing, the augment, the sigma alpha, the main here, which is first person singular, and then we have the ego that's hidden there in kago, and so, and I greeted him. So, after I worshipped in the house, a man entered and greeted me, and I greeted him. All right, one last one. So let's work on our last verse here, and this one comes from John 12. So we have egnoson here, which is from gnosko, which is the hardest part of this one in particular. You've got the epsilon, the gamma nu omega that tells you it's from gnosko, the sigma alpha, which tells you this is third plural, so you won't confuse it with the first singular, along with the nu there that tells us it's third plural. But along with that as well, the hoi mathetai tells us that this is the subject of the sentence, and a third or a nominative plural noun needs a third person plural verb. So that's the subject. Tauta is the object. And so the first part here, you have his disciples did not know these things, and then the top proton is functioning temporally here with the verb largely, did not know these things at first. Okay? Or the first. But, or you could even say the first time, did not know these things the first time, but when, and then we have ed doxaste from doxadzo, and then we have the augment there, and the theta eta that tells us it's aorist passive, and we have doxaste. The zeta has transitioned here to a sigma in the aorist passive. So we have, but when Jesus was glorified, doxadzo, I glorify, when Jesus was glorified, then, and then we have mneistheson, which is from the verb that means I remember. I don't think that you've had this verb yet either. That's right, he does give this to you. And I don't know that you'll have it this year at least. You've got the theta eta that tells you it's aorist passive. You've got the epsilon that tells you this is an augment. And then you've got the sigma alpha that tells you it's third plural, which should make sense because it's the same as the egnoson here. And then the nu, is going to tell us that it's third person plural along with the sigma alpha. So that way the first singular and third plural don't look the same in the aorist passive or the perfective passive. So here we have, then they remembered that. Then we have here tauta ain ep auto gegramina, and so here we have this ain. It's not really clear what gegramina might go with, and you've got an ain, and when you've got an amy verb and gegramina or any kind of participle in a clause together, you need to recognize that this could be a periphrastic, and in this instance it is. Okay, that these things, and so this is an imperfect, indicative third person singular from a me, and then gegramena is a perfect participle. You've got the men there, a perfect active participle, accusative, nominative or accusative, neuter, plural. I think would be our would be what we have here, which goes with the tauta. So that these things, and so the imperfect plus the perfect participle, had been written ep auto, about him, and then we have these things so tauta here is going to be the direct object in the context, because I don't think it's these things did to him. That makes a lot of sense, but it does make sense to say with this aorist, perfective, indicative, third person plural, you've got the son there again. Now this time it's not to keep it from looking like the first singular. This is just the third plural. So we have either, and these things did to him, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but and they did these things to him makes a lot of sense, or against him if it's a dative of disadvantage. So his disciples did not know these things, and this is a little, normally you would expect the autou to follow, but for whatever reason John has not chosen that path. So they did not know, his disciples did not know these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written, ep auto is about him, and then these things had been written about him, and they did these things to him. All right, I hope that these are helpful for you, and if we have any further questions, again, we can talk about them in class, because hopefully the subjunctive will be pretty straightforward for us all. Hope you have a blessed day. See you soon.